Hello, and welcome to A Reader's History of Science Fiction. I'm Alex Howe, and this is Season 2, Episode 22. Catch-up Episode number 8, Space Sci-Fi. So, this is a little awkward. I called this episode Space Sci-Fi, but I ultimately realized that I was defining space pretty broadly. All of the movies I'm covering here are space-related, but several of them don't actually happen in space. The Tomorrow War is about aliens, but it all takes place on Earth, so it really should have gone in the action movie episode. Greenland is about a comet impact, but it's really a disaster movie, although I admittedly didn't have a separate category for that. And Don't Look Up is also about a comet, but, well, when you get right down to it, that one's not really about the comet. This episode is also a little awkward because I very deliberately skipped a couple of these movies. I read up on them enough that I feel I can say something about them, but not give a full review. And I also realized too late in the process that I probably should be covering Star Trek Picard here. Everybody seems to be loving Season 3, but I only got through Season 1. I know, I'm a bad Trekkie. Somehow I just never found the time after Season 1. I'd like to come back and do a special edition about TV shows in a few months, but for now we'll have to set them aside. Anyway, I do have a few movies to talk about, so we might as well get started. 2, or kinda sorta 3, of the quote-unquote space-related movies from the past 3 years have been disaster movies about comet and asteroid impacts. And I only watched one of them, Greenland. The other 2 were Don't Look Up and Moonfall, which I just couldn't muster up the motivation to sit through. Greenland was very much in the vein of classic disaster movies like Deep Impact, or maybe even more similar to 2012, although much better done than that one. It starts with a comet that is going to drop a few fragments on Earth, and everyone says it's going to be perfectly safe, until one of those fragments wipes Tampa off the map while being 1,000 miles off course. It's soon revealed that a planet-killer fragment, quote-unquote, is coming in 2 days. And mind you, this is after the sky has been filling with planes ferrying evacuees to secret shelters in Greenland, so it's pretty clear the government has been covering up the threat, even though that's never stated. John Garrity, an engineer from Atlanta, receives an emergency message informing him that his family has been selected for evacuation. But this quickly goes awry, between the military somehow failing to check the medical records of his diabetic son, and a whole lot of desperate people who are willing to do anything to get a seat on one of those planes. The result is that the Garritys don't get on the military plane, and wind up in a convoluted Hail Mary plan to get to Greenland another way, which honestly didn't seem like a good choice to me. I think their odds would have been better, not good, but better, if they stayed at Grandpa's farm in Kentucky. But that's another story. So, when I say that Greenland was very well done, that doesn't exactly mean I enjoyed it. For me, Greenland felt very real and honestly very stressful. It's a visceral feeling of how the world would react to a killer comet, to the point where I couldn't stand to watch it in one sitting. And that's completely separate from its quality. It's just that as an astronomer, it hit a little too close to home. Now, granted, I don't know if a government shelter program would be run like that, but I could envision it. Although I'm reasonably sure that the government couldn't cover up the fact that the comet was going to hit us for the presumably several weeks leading up to the impact. Amateur astronomers are just too good, and that's before you consider that all of the world's governments would have to be involved. I could nitpick the science in this movie. They both under- and overestimated the damage caused by the comet in different parts, but that would really take its own blog post. The narrative hung together very well internally, so it worked as a disaster movie on those grounds. No complaints, it just wasn't exactly my style. Now, Don't Look Up is also a movie about a comet, but this one was a lot less optimistic, if you can believe it. It's a dark satire on the politics of our time, and everyone dies at the end. The story goes that astronomers discover a comet that's going to hit Earth in 6 months and wipe out all human life. But instead of the world coming together and mounting a mission to stop it, the president alternately ignores it, fearing it will hurt her re-election chances, and makes vapid, politically calculated statements about it, ultimately coming back around to telling her supporters don't look up. The media is too busy worrying about the gossip of the day to pay attention. A tech billionaire proposes a money-making scheme to mine the comet for resources, which is doomed to failure. And ultimately, the world can't get its act together to do anything about it, and everyone is doomed. Yeah. So, this movie isn't actually about a comet. It's really about climate change, as the producers have said. It's not about the pandemic, because it was in fact made before the pandemic. But of course, since it came out during the pandemic, and far enough into it to make a movie if they wanted to, people read that message into it. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Either way, it's about the state of our political system and its failure to deal with looming crises. And for me, I could not bring myself to watch Don't Look Up. Too politicized, too in-your-face, and I thought it would just annoy me. Not because of the science. From what I've read, that was more or less okay. The depictions of scientists were reportedly pretty good, and I know a lot of my fellow scientists liked it. I just couldn't do it. And I'm having trouble articulating precisely what I found off-putting about the idea. Maybe it's just because I don't like the idiot plot. And I know in this movie there's a good narrative reason for people to be idiots, but it still felt like too much to me. Maybe it's the central premise where the Donald Trump knockoff president convinces her supporters to literally not look up. It sounds too stupid for me to take seriously. You see, I've heard rare stories of truly fringe people, flat earthers, 2012 doomsdayers, who were rigid enough in their delusions that they would literally refuse to go outside and look up at the sky to see the evidence there, insisting that it was some sort of trick. But I have trouble seeing a large enough number of people to swing national politics behaving like that. Would they claim it's a ruse to seize power, as you see all too often in American politics today? Probably, but I think they would still listen when people said, "Hey guys, you know you can see an actual comet up there, right?" It also doesn't help that it strikes me as kind of a poor fit for climate change. I don't want to try to compare it point for point with the climate change issue. Climate change is not the same as a comet. But I do think that weakens the case because you can't stop a comet from hitting Earth only a little bit. You can do that with climate change, even though it's not a good solution. But no allegory is perfect, so I feel like that's kind of missing the point. I guess maybe it is that I just take issue with portraying the world as being that terminally stupid, perhaps especially to make a political point. Maybe you think it's a fair assessment of the world today, but I choose to be more optimistic. And from Don't Look Up, Moonfall sounded even worse. I thought Don't Look Up would annoy me. I knew Moonfall would annoy me. I mean, come on, the whole premise of the movie is that the moon is falling out of orbit. Really? From the title alone, I had a strong suspicion that it was going to be a stupid, scientifically brain-dead mess along the lines of Doctor Who's Kill the Moon. Don't get me started on that one. Or the 2003 disaster movie The Core, if you're not up on Doctor Who. And in fact, reading the summary on Wikipedia, it looks like the plot of Moonfall was alarmingly similar to Kill the Moon. They seem to have gotten the science better on some points, but it's still pretty bad. Long story short, the moon is actually an alien megastructure, and a swarm of alien robots is siphoning energy from it, causing its orbit to decay, which makes no sense physically, with world-ending consequences on Earth. And with most of NASA's assets destroyed, some astronauts have to go to the moon in a refurbished space shuttle, which is in no way designed to go to the moon, with a secret weapon that can destroy the swarm. It's Kill the Moon, but with robots. And where do I start with this? Well, in the original draft, I spent the next 500 words ranting about how bad that science is. So that should give you some clue. One non-science thing I want to point out is that the idea of the moon being a hollow megastructure is in fact a New Age conspiracy theory, which was apparently an actual inspiration for the movie. They lose points for that alone in my eyes. And the science only goes downhill fast from there. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Moonfall has the dishonor of being the first piece of media I'm giving an anti-recommendation to sight unseen. Don't watch Moonfall. Don't give it the dignity of your attention. It's just stupid and a haven for conspiracy nuts. Moving on. The other two movies on my list I did watch. The first of these was The Tomorrow War. This was a Paramount film that was sold to Amazon Prime during the pandemic, which I'm not sure if they could really call it an Amazon original in that case, but that's neither here nor there. The premise of The Tomorrow War is that in the final of the 2022 World Cup, time travelers from the future show up and tell us that in 2051, humanity has been nearly wiped out by aliens called white spikes, and they need the manpower of the past to keep the war effort going. They never figured out where the white spikes came from or how they got here, so they can't just change the past to stop them. Amid great social unrest and an improbable 80% mortality rate for those fighting, a worldwide draft is instituted. A year later, things have only gotten worse, and retired Green Beret Dan Forrester is one of those drafted. He goes to the future, nearly gets killed a bunch of times, meets his daughter, who turns out to be one of the leaders of the war effort, and is sent on a desperate last-ditch mission to capture a queen white spike so they can figure out how to kill them and send the solution to the past. And this all gets accomplished in the first 2/3 of the movie. The Tomorrow War got mixed reviews. Personally, I thought it was pretty good, except for one thing, which is that the pacing was really weird. The mission was completed, the solution to end the war was sent back to the past, and there was still a third of the running time left. The remaining third of the movie ended up being a secret mission to find where the white spikes are frozen in ice in the present and take them out before the war can start. I have mixed feelings about this. I actually thought the story was really tightly written. The major plot holes, the fact that they aren't trying to change the future at first, the fact that the white spikes attack unarmed and unorganized like animals, were filled in pretty neatly by the end. But I did not understand what they were doing with the story structure. It would have made more sense to stick with the future war parts and make those a bit longer. Or, if the movie we got was really the story they wanted to tell, stretch it out and make it a miniseries. Still, I thought it was a good story that deserved better than the reviews it got. The final movie on my list was the real sci-fi blockbuster of 2021, Dune. And I admit I wasn't that interested in seeing Dune either. Like I said when I discussed the book, I was not enthused by the book. I thought the courtly intrigue in the first act was a lot more interesting than what it became after that. I'd normally be all over a big adaptation like this, but I just wasn't interested in the source material. The movie, however, does a very good job of adapting that source material. Yes, it has the usual pitfalls of adapting a large novel that they had to rush through a lot. I might have said they'd do better with a miniseries, but the Sci-Fi Channel already tried that in 2000, and from what I've heard, it came out so-so. As it is, this movie only covered half the first book, and they still had to rush things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Like I said, I thought this was a very good adaptation of the source material. In fact, dare I say it, I thought this was the rare movie that was better than the book. Many Herbert fans may disagree with me, but that's what I thought. Maybe I'm just misremembering the book, but I thought it flowed better. Paul seems quite a bit more normal despite his powers. It got the foreshadowing a lot better. Paul's visions of Chani make their relationship make a lot more sense. I thought it came completely out of nowhere in the book. There are a couple of beats of Paul encountering the Muad'Dib kangaroo mouse that help explain his choice of that name, which felt really random to me in the book. The idea of Paul as the Messiah and his play for the throne are more front-loaded, making his relationship with his destiny feel more natural. Actually, now I'm tempted to reread the book to see if I just missed all that stuff the first time. The amount I didn't understand in the book when I read it compared with how it came together in the movie makes me wonder. Something to do before the second movie, perhaps. And yes, there is a second movie coming, since the first one only covered half the first book. So, the Dune novel is divided into 3 books. I don't mean Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, but divisions within the first book. Just like Lord of the Rings is internally divided into 6 books rather than the 3 volumes. I clarify that because it makes it kind of difficult to search online with all the novels and movies and series. This Dune movie doesn't break along the book structure, though. Rather, it covers Book 1 and the majority of Book 2 of the first novel, but leaves off in the middle of Book 2, when Paul and Jessica join the Fremen. although that is a fairly natural breakpoint in the story. Dune Part 2, covering the second half of the book, is slated for this November. And Denis Villeneuve is also planning for a movie of Dune Messiah. Anyway, some of the best praise I can give Part 1 is that I will definitely be seeing Part 2 in theaters, and may even reread the book despite my feelings toward it. That's all the movies on my list, but there's one area of books in space fiction that I also want to catch up on: the Firefly tie-in novels. Fans have been clamoring for new content in the Firefly/Serenity verse ever since the series first aired in 2003. There was even a short-lived campaign to raise funds to buy the rights to the series. And they did get a movie and a series of graphic novels, but it was only in 2018 that the creators began what would produce the most new content, a book series. And I kind of lost track of these too during the pandemic. I've only gotten through book 5, and there are 7 at the moment, with an 8th coming soon. Although that was more because I was disillusioned with the 5th book. These books aren't perfect. They have their high and low points, but they feel like a worthy continuation of the Firefly storyline pre-Serenity. They kind of float around on the timeline. Some are set before Inara and Book left the ship, and some after, but much like the graphic novels, they felt like they could have been episodes of the series. You have Mal getting captured by browncoats who blame him for their loss in Big Damn Hero. You have Jane trying to help his old girlfriend liberate her home from gangsters, and possibly finding out that he has a daughter, in The Magnificent Nine. The crew getting trapped in nightmares by a malfunctioning piece of tech in The Ghost Machine. River meeting a legendary earlier version of the Alliance's super soldiers in Generations. And then there's Life Signs. Any Firefly fan is likely to enjoy these books, but I said there were highs and lows, and Life Signs was definitely the low for me. Despite being written by the same author as the first 3 books, James Lovegrove, who thankfully hasn't returned for the later ones, Life Signs went off the rails. Here's how it is. Going all the way back to the original series, there was a fan theory that Inara was suffering from a terminal illness. Reading up on it after the fact, it feels like grasping at straws to me. It even recontextualizes some of the story beats from the series in ways that I think make less sense. But whether or not it was the intention of the original series, Lovegrove adopted that storyline for Life Signs, and it did not work for me. It's a decent story in principle, but it doesn't feel like it fits as an episode in the series. The timeline doesn't make sense. Is there really time for Inara to leave the ship, wind up on her deathbed, call her friends back in, get cured, and then leave again, plus fitting in all the other post-TV show stories, all in the 2 years before the Serenity movie? I'm skeptical. It also changes her motivation for leaving the ship, which is an important character point. It obviously never gets mentioned at later points in the timeline, and people also say that Lovegrove's writing has gone downhill with this book. The character's mannerisms are off. River in particular is far too normal. And he also made a really big continuity error regarding Fiddler's Green. I don't want to make this whole section about Life Signs. Like I said, the series as a whole has been good, and I'm going to dive into the next 3 books soon. Personally, I think I would take The Magnificent Nine as the best of the 5 books I've read. Serious fans may prefer to skip Life Signs, but if you like Firefly, and you didn't know about them already, you should probably check the books out. This has been A Reader's History of Science Fiction. This podcast is hosted by Libsyn and is available on all the major platforms. You can find me on YouTube at Science Meets Fiction, on Twitter and Mastodon at Sci Meets Fiction, and my website is sciencemeetsfiction.com. For my movie recommendation this episode, I'm going to go with Dune. This was a very solid adaptation, which I think was actually better than the book, although that may say more about my opinion of the book. And I'm much more enthused to see the second part than I was the first one, so they did a good job with it. In the next episode, I'm coming back around to a topic that I've discussed several times in passing, but never quite got around to addressing head-on. What exactly is space opera, and how does it fit into the larger history of science fiction? Thanks for listening.